No, well, it does like an automated tweet out. So let me just check and see if that's there. It
Okay,
should
'cause
be.
I can retweet it then. If
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, if you want to, no big deal.
uh,
Um, so Mario, finally, how you doing?
Good, good. How you doing?
I'm
Thanks for having
doing
me on,
well.
man.
Yeah,
Excited to be here.
thanks for coming on, man. I've been looking forward to chatting you for a while. And a recent tweet thread, I guess pulled this all together. And I can't remember who it was who said, Mario should go on the pod for a chat. But anyways, here we are.
Oh, I didn't know someone said that. Oh yeah, so that was one of the responses or so. Yeah, and then you said standing offer, and then I pestered you
Exactly.
because I like talking to people. I like going on podcasts. It's fun. Yeah.
All right, we will jump right into it. But before we do that, for people that aren't familiar with you, why don't you give them the brief intro into who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I am the customer support lead at Blockstream. I've been there coming up on 3 years now, and so that's how I pay the bills. And I also do my own podcast with a few buddies, the Brian and Colin Alds and Ruben Thompson. So the four of us do the Unhashed podcast, which is probably about 50% kind of analysis of what's going on in the space, and then 50% pretty crass humor. So it's give us a listen. It's a lot of fun. If you guys don't know who they are, Ruben is a kind of independent researcher in the space. He's the creator of State Chains, and he's done some other work on snarks and kind of various other things. And what's he working on now? He did some like perpetual one-way peg thing. And then the Alds brothers run privacypros.io. They make the billfold kind of metal storage device. I think those are the two main things. I don't know. I rant about stuff on Twitter. I like being the heterodox in the space because I'm not. I don't consider myself a libertarian. I lean libertarian in certain ways, so it makes for a lot of fun conversations.
Right.
That should be kind of a good lead into why I'm here, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I know we've got some other common interests, which hopefully we'll have time to dig into. But we'll
Absolutely.
for context, for people that weren't there on the thread for how this came together, I'll just briefly give a bit of context, and then we'll talk about it. And I'll summarize as best I can. So,
sure.
You tweeted out, I'm sure knowing that it was going to receive some bites, that I'm a proponent of Bitcoin and UBI. It's not that hard, really. Equating UBI with communism is like equating modern-day Norway with Cambodia under Pol Pot. It makes zero sense. Aside from that, all you need is to believe that Bitcoin won't totally destroy state capacity. And of course, there was a lot of responses. Eric Boscool jumped in, and it's always fun to get tangled up with Eric. And then not Nate. I think he might have been the one to suggest this pod, actually. But he said, let's use classic logic, because you said taxation is not theft. And he said,
I mean, at that point, I was like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, might as well cover all these. But I mean, it's worth noting. I was responding to Steve Barbour. I'm not sure.
Barbour,
yeah. Barbour, like the profession. Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I like it on these podcasts is all these words I've only ever seen on screens. You got to figure out how to say them. Okay. Because I was responding to a tweet from him that was basically saying like he has no idea how people like can be into Bitcoin and UBI at the same time because he was basically making the case that they're fundamentally opposite and said it's like being into free markets and communism, right?
He said, how is it possible to be both pro UBI and pro BTC, pro communism versus pro free markets? You're right. So that you were just retweeting that with your own comments on top of it. And then a big back and forth with Eric and a number of other people. And then not Nate said, let's use classic logic. Premise 1, all non-voluntary confiscation of property is theft. Premise 2, taxation is a form of non-voluntary confiscation of property. Conclusion, therefore, taxation is theft. Can we go home now? And then you said, disagree with premise 1. And then my contribution to the thread was, I'm curious, how specifically do you disagree with premise 1? And you said coercive confiscation of property is not theft if the entity taking it is the rightful owner of said property.
Right.
So let me hand it over to you now.
All right. I think it's sure. I go back and forth with Colin on our show a lot about this.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me just before I hand it over to you, because I'm sure you've got a lot of more meat you can put on that one. But I guess on that point, coercive confiscation of property is not theft if the entity taking it is the rightful owner of said property. I guess that it's kind of like if the entity taking it is already the rightful owner, then how is it confiscation, or where is there confiscation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a less common situation. Like, I mean, if we want to not use a taxation example, like, I mean, if I don't know, if you steal something from me and I, take it back coercively, I don't think that counts as theft. That's me just reclaiming what is rightfully mine. Like, of course, that's not a perfect analogy to taxation, but I'm just illustrating the point that there are ways that you can forcibly take something from someone else if it doesn't belong to them. I don't think possession of an object is the exact same as being the rightful owner of it. I think it is in most cases, but not always.
And so in this particular example, let's just use the example of taxation. Someone earns income.
Yeah.
And for the government to take a portion of that income, you're saying that is not theft.
Well, it can be. It depends. I mean, there's certain types of taxation that I don't agree with, and I'm happy to call them theft. I mean, if you want to run a society where, the government takes 95% of people's income, fuck that. That's theft. Like, that's ridiculous. But here in Canada, like, I mean, I'm sure we're not at optimal tax levels, but I don't think the optimum is zero. And my worldview is generally like I'm a utilitarian. I want to advocate for the things that I think will produce kind of greatest well-being, minimal suffering, and to my best estimation, having an effective state is positive. And so for that reason, I'm happy to acknowledge that certain levels of taxation are just and okay. And in that case, I would consider taxes to be the rightful property of the government. In which case, if they are the rightful property of the government, it's not theft to take them.
Right. So I guess what people have difficulty with here is, that it hinges on your subjective assessment of whether or not the taxation rate as stipulated by the government is quote unquote fair or acceptable or reasonable or
yes,
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so it's difficult to build, kind of logic upon that, right? Because it
doesn't offer as simple answers as the kind of I don't know, what do you want to call the opposing viewpoint? Like the anarcho-capitalist perspective, or?
I think the opposing viewpoint would just be that it has to be voluntary, So like, even if you're not an anarcho-capitalist, let's say you're a statist, right? But you're a statist under a hard money system where any money that the government takes from you has to be voluntarily given.
Sure. I mean, but then is it really a government if they aren't able to apply monopoly of force to take it from you?
Well, that's true.
I mean, in that case, I mean, that seems just like a very optimistic a perspective of what anarcho-capitalism would look like. No,
I think it would manifest in that way. My perspective on this, and because people fall into these camps: libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, statist, Democrat, Republican, whatever. I see money as being the fundamental coordinating mechanism for human interaction, especially human economic interaction and human organization. And I feel like the more coordination that we can delegate to the money in use in a society, the better. And the less that we can delegate to it, the reason why we can delegate less to it is because it's not capable of handling, the coordination that we want from it. We have to build structures around it to facilitate the coordination that it can't naturally produce. And that, I think, is a big part of what we call governance, the structures that we put around the money to make everything work. And so what I'm interested in seeing is what kind of a society that we get when we're on, fast forward to a Bitcoin standard. How much of the coordination that we seek in society can be done simply by the money in the market, and what is left over that it can't do, that we are going to have to find some way of supra-monetary coordination, i.e. getting together and figuring out how to do things. And, we call that governance. Does it look at anything like what we have now? I don't know. But I guess my premise is, I think we're always going to want to coordinate and cooperate on large enough scales, on fairly large scales, and that I don't think any money is ever going to be perfect enough to
eliminate the need for like
completely eliminate the need for some for some non-monetary coordinating mechanism. What that looks like, how big is it? I don't know. That's why my philosophy is just let's get Bitcoin over the line and see. Obviously it's I think Bitcoin is going to dissolve the state dramatically in the long run. And what's left over, I think it'll be a gradual process of where things that used to be handled by the state are increasingly taken over by a free market that's predicated upon Bitcoin. And we'll see what's left over that we want to coordinate that is not able to be coordinated by the free market and the money that it runs on, which is Bitcoin.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there. But I most of what I heard, I agreed with. It was just like the last 10 seconds or so. I guess my main point of disagreement would be that where I think that Bitcoin is absolutely going to transform governments, but I don't think that they're going to become this tiny shell of their former selves. I think that in general, people within the Bitcoin community vastly underestimate how effective taxation can be. I don't believe that the existence of a state is dependent on printing money and self-sovereignty. For most of human history, there were states that did not rely on this. Now, granted, for the last 100 years or so, almost all of them have been, and so there will be big changes. But the collection of taxes, I think, will continue. It will still be trivial to extract property taxes from people, for example, because if they refuse to pay them and hide their Bitcoins away somewhere else, the state can just take their property, for example. And so I think that, there will be a much larger shift towards, maybe different forms of taxation. But I also, I'm just trying to figure out, there's like so many different lines we can take this down. I'm just wondering which one to focus on. Why don't you respond to that? Like, we don't need to go into more.
Yeah, sure. And we can go anywhere, but I guess back to the original premise, before we get, lost in the weeds of what things may look like and how much is going to be dissolved and all that kind of stuff. You said, do we call it a state if it doesn't apply coercive, if it doesn't have the monopoly on force? Because, otherwise it's just a market providing services to people who are demanding them.
Right.
So if we take that definition and we say that we still have the problem of justifying to what degree they use that force, i.e. what is the tax rate, let's say, predicated on 30 million, 300 million, 1.3 billion people subjective viewpoint on how reasonable that taxation rate is and how reasonable that application of monopoly force is. Right.
Okay, so you're hiding the problem. How if you take my worldview, it basically comes down to everybody's got to kind of make up their own mind on where it is and how do you reach agreement on that? Is that it?
It's that. And absent, I think, being able to do that, I think there has to be some underlying principles. And I think a lot of people, and this would be my viewpoint as well, is that, if you take something from me via force that I'm not voluntarily giving, I consider that theft.
Sure. But you realize that is also your subjective view on this.
Well, everything is subjective, but it's a principle. Right. It's a principle that can be consistent across, all people and places.
It can when you're theorizing about it. I actually suspect that it can't really be consistent when it comes to. It can be consistent when you're like discussing it. And I agree that it gives simpler answers to these questions, but I don't agree that the simpler answers that it yields actually points people in the direction of better solutions to a lot of problems that you run into. So sure, you can build up that philosophy using those axioms and say, okay, taxation is theft, and I don't tell other people that they're not allowed to call taxation theft. If you want to define theft as simply as any coercive confiscation of property, that's fine with me. I'm not trying to tell anyone their definitions are wrong. But I don't use that language because most people, when you ask them, is theft okay? The answer is no. Like, it's kind of inherent in the definition of the word that it's something that's morally wrong. And I don't consider all forms of taxation to be morally wrong because to the best of my understanding, a society that is unable to, a society that can't extract any taxes, is not going to function very well. I'm quite pessimistic. I'm sorry, I'm just laughing at this comment. Vake chimed in and asked me about nano. Jesus Christ. Yeah. So again, like, I'm not telling people they can't, that their philosophy is inconsistent or anything. And I completely concede that my approach does leave a lot of ambiguity, and you have this problem where there aren't very clear answers in certain cases. But I think that that's kind of a feature, not a bug. That's, if you don't have perfect information about the world, there are going to be some situations where you don't have a very clear answer, and that's okay. So you're going to ask, like, okay, how do we coordinate everybody's subjective opinions on this? Yeah, it's a really tough problem. So far as human history has gone, democracy seems to be the least bad solution to that problem. Democracies in some form have produced the societies with the highest quality of life for their citizens. So I think that's the best we've got at the moment. I think Bitcoin can solve a lot of problems. I think that we are really overreaching if we think that it's going to solve those types of coordination problems so completely.
So just to backtrack a little bit, you said there that you think that taxation is kind of fundamental to the proper functioning of a society, and therefore, in order to obtain that benefit from that the coercive use of force to obtain that taxation to appropriate the assets of citizens in that country is justified and is morally okay.
Yeah, I mean, not in all situations, but in Canada, for example, yeah, I'm content. I'm sure there's a lot of room for improvements.
But let's not use like the specific examples yet. So we're saying that in some cases, basically aggressing on someone against their will is acceptable if it will net a highly subjective, uncertain, positive outcome. See, this is the issue.
I debate how subjective the positive outcome is. Like, I don't think it's that subjective. I think there's a tremendous amount of evidence that having a certain amount of state capacity is very, very good for society and people's well-being.
Okay, well, let's shelve that one for a second.
Sure.
We can come back to that. But let's assume you're correct. Okay. The quote unquote society, whatever that is, and the metrics on which we base that, whatever they may be, are to some degree, whatever degree that may be, improved as a result of aggressing on an individual to appropriate their wealth.
Sure.
That justifies it?
Yeah.
The fact that it may be good for some people to a certain degree means that we can violate what I think
not that loosely. I mean, there has to be very, very strong evidence that it's very, very good for.
Yeah, but my point is these things are always going to have at least some level of vagueness to them. They can't be perfectly defined.
Sure.
The people that benefit, how much they benefit, what the benefit is, and all the different, downstream effects and all this kind of stuff. So we have to kind of rely on the principle here to say, okay, let's just say the benefit is real.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The net benefit. Again, I'm really not very comfortable with framing it that way, because net benefit is a hard thing to nail down. Mm-hmm. But let's just say that's the case.
Right.
That means that it's acceptable to use force to aggress upon an individual to appropriate their wealth.
Yeah.
So what rights do the individual have in your mind? Does the individual have in your mind? What kind of inalienable rights?
Say, like, all. I mean, there are lots of them. I mean, like, I don't like. I believe equal treatment under the law is an important right. I mean, I think people have the right to, like, freedom of speech. Within a certain degree. Like, I don't think you have freedom of speech to, advocate for the killing of, like, ethnic minorities, for example. But I think you have freedom to criticize your own government. I mean, like, you want me to just keep going? I think people have the right to their own property. And
but isn't that a fundamental one?
Right to property?
Yeah.
I think it absolutely is, yeah. For example, like, so I don't think that the governments can just arbitrarily take from people. I think that, yeah, you have to have a very clear, it has to be consistently applied. And it's not a lot of times, and it's a big problem. I think it needs to be consistently applied, though. It needs to be the process by which the amount of property belongs to the state needs to be decided in an open and transparent manner. Doesn't happen all the time. Big problem, but something that we have gotten relatively better at over the ages. I mean, does that help out?
I mean, not really, because it's still violating, I guess, maybe the most fundamental right that a person can have is, the right to their property, starting with their body and anything that they voluntarily and freely obtain through very trade. That
right,
it's almost,
but a lot of what they acquire through that trade is dependent on services and infrastructure and being protected by the state from outside forces.
It can be.
And so for that reason, I think that it's perfectly okay to say that a certain portion of what they generate is owed.
Yeah, but why not charge for it directly?
Because you run. That's a great question. I think because you run into essentially these tragedy of the commons issues, where if it was voluntary, like if I didn't have to pay taxes but could use all the services the government provided, why would I pay my taxes? I could just let other people do that, and then eventually over time, you just the freeloaders get rewarded. It's a free rider problem, and then people don't voluntarily contribute, and then the services break down and everyone's worse off.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges with having this conversation is we're having it from deep within a highly developed state apparatus that's been ongoing in the world for several years and has been evolving in the world for several years. And I think it's when we talk about a completely different, perhaps, system of human organization, it's hard to just pluck out each example from today and try to move it over there.
Well, there is no completely voluntary society to compare it to, right?
Right. That's kind of what I'm saying, right? So we can't just say like, well, what would this look like in a purely, let's say, Bitcoin world? Because a lot of other things would be different in the surrounding context of even considering how that one thing might be different.
I think the fact that there aren't existing completely voluntary societies is a strong piece of evidence against the fact that they can function stably. I think that if that was a very effective way to go about things and build a functioning society, we would see that existing. But I think that the fact that they are absent speaks volumes. And you can even argue that it would be better if we could somehow get to this state, like a state not as in government, but like situation. But then you run into the problem where, okay, I mean, like let's say you have some country and the land suddenly becomes this completely free territory. Like, how do you prevent existing forces from taking advantage of that and invading? Like, I mean, is there a solution? There might be one, but I don't see any evidence. I don't see strong evidence for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I agree that it's a problem that we can't make direct comparisons, but I think that the absence of a comparison to make is kind of an indication in and of itself.
Yeah, I'd agree with a couple of things there. I think that's an issue, right? And I sometimes think of that myself. Like, let's say we're all in a citadel on like a Caribbean island at some point in 10 years time. And, the world is bifurcated into Bitcoin and old world. Well, what's to stop, China from coming up and just saying like, yeah, that's cute, but we're going to take things
this is
over
ours now.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think, I'm sure you've read The Sovereign Individual, or I suspect you haven't read it?
No, it's on my list. I've had it recommended to me a bunch. I haven't read it yet, though.
Well, but, basically one of the main premises of the book is that, effectively violence has always been a paying proposition throughout history. And there's many reasons for that. But, to sum it up extremely briefly, let's say the agricultural revolution with, its surpluses and its, specialization and things like that, it created stationary capital. And once you have stationary capital, then you have something to protect, and you also have a honeypot that's worth stealing. And this kind of over time has influence the rewards to violence when it's been exacted. And I think one of the things that's exciting about Bitcoin is that it changes the logic of violence to some degree. Of course, you can still put a gun to somebody's head and say, would you rather die or would you rather give me your Bitcoin? And, people can make that choice, but it does change it to some degree. And I think that changing of the logic of violence will be interesting, and I think will have implications for the state. But to backtrack a little bit,
just I agree with all that so far, by the way, just so we're clear.
I think one of the things, I guess, because I take your point that we're here for a reason. There's a reason why there's no anarcho-capitalist states, existing anywhere in the world or thriving anywhere in the world. And I do think a big part of it is because of that monopoly on force and the logic of violence. And basically, whoever's the most powerful, wins. And that is true within countries, and that's true in between countries. But I guess when people talk about the anarcho-capitalist stuff, the voluntarism, the non-aggression principle, I guess they're talking about ideals, and ideals that are predicated on principles or values or axioms that they would want to use as the foundation for a society.
Yes.
Maybe they're being, overly optimistic, but I think that's what people are. That's why they're so kind of passionately supportive of this, because that's the type of things they want a society to be founded on. Maybe you're just being a realist and saying, guys, it doesn't work that way.
Oh, no, so listen, if you can convince me that it works, I'm on board, man. Like my problem is not the goal. My problem is the implementation. So yeah, I guess maybe you can call me a realist then. I'm with you there. But so absolutely, you like come up with these principles, and so you have your axioms and you derive logically what would be good or bad from there. So I get where it comes from, but there's a big, this kind of hits at a more fundamental issue that I think is at the root of a lot of disagreements that I have with other people in space here, about where empiricism comes in. Because Bitcoiners are very, very heavy on axioms and logic and kind of rationally deducting things, and are not as big on empiricism, compared to other fields where I see people interacting. Mainstream economists tend to be pretty heavy on empiricism, and and that has its own problems. You can run into bad data and draw bad conclusions. But I think where empiricism is important is you can start with some axioms, and you can choose whatever axioms you want. And I like the ones that libertarians start with. It's great. These are good ideals to strive for, and then you kind of deduct. You come to conclusions by logically extrapolating from those axioms. But then I think it's also important to then compare those conclusions to the data we see in the real world. Because if you take the libertarian stance, you would expect that the countries in the world that have the smallest state capacity, that have the smallest size of government, would correlate very, very well with highest quality of life and stuff. And you don't actually see that. You don't see the opposite either. We saw in the 20th century that going for maximal state control is also a complete disaster. You look at what happened in the Great Leap Forward. What's happening now in North Korea. With in Cambodia and stuff, like what I referenced in the original tweet. But you also don't see the opposite, where lowest taxation equals highest quality of life. And so for me, I take that as an indication, okay, so there's a mismatch here between the conclusions drawn from this set of axioms with the data we see in the real world, which kind of indicates that the axioms themselves are not as good as they're purported to be. They're kind of presented as self-evident. You derive from there, but yeah, I mean, if I am more interested in what is going to work in the real world than I am aspiring to any sort of ideal. So, I think that's where a lot of it comes down to.
So, what would you say to circumstances which which appear to be emerging today? Now, perhaps they're overblown, or perhaps they're underrepresented. Who knows? But let's say in a country like the United States, where this kind of socialist fervor is increasing, and people want to tax the rich more, and they want the government to take care of more and provide all sorts of different services. And going back to what you were saying about, well, if it's reasonable, if the taxation is reasonable, then the method you take it the method by which you take it is acceptable effectively. Like the government can use their monopoly on force to appropriate wealth if it's a reasonable amount. And we're getting into this, we seem to be moving into this stage where increasingly large number of people, and quite understandably, because they're suffering, and there's many different reasons why, and I'm sure we could articulate a lot of those reasons, and maybe we should, but people are asking for more from the government effectively.
Right.
And so a certain cohort of people, a certain segment of people,
sure,
and let's say, just for simplicity, that means taxes are going to go up. The government will charge more taxes. Is that reasonable? Is there a limit to the? Is there a limit to the reasonableness of that?
So there's a couple different ways this plays out. Like, I mean, first of all, like I agree that there's a big push for more taxation and kind of larger government than I would like. And so one way is that I believe strongly in using your voice and like speaking out against it and exercising your vote. I do believe people should vote. Again, that's not really a popular a position in the Bitcoin space, and I think maybe in the general population it is overblown, but like that is one way to exercise some influence. And then also I think what happens is there's a certain Darwinism between states. I think certain places are going to push for too much and are going to really try to overextend the state, are really going to over-regulate the hell out of themselves, and there will be bad consequences, and other places will learn from that. People will leave those places and move to locations where they have more reasonable policies in place. This is why I think freedom of movement between countries, between regions, is absolutely paramount. I think it's incredibly important to make sure it's easy for people to freely choose where they live. And like this is kind of happening in California right now, from what I understand. Like a lot of people are leaving San Francisco just because there's a bunch of really bonkers, like far left policies going on there, and they're moving over to Texas. And there's a lot you can talk about there. Like the people in Texas seem to be taking issue with like Californians coming over, but yeah, I think that there's going to be there's competition between regions, which is good because it means if places push it too far, things will get bad, and other places can learn from them. And over time, people can move to the states. Now, ideally, you don't want people to have to move all the time, and so I think it's important also to educate yourself on these issues and push back against those policies being purported.
It's actually an interesting point because I think this may even tie back to kind of the utility, or not the utility, the influence of these axioms or ideals that we were talking about a few minutes ago. Because, and this again is represented in the sovereign individual, but basically as the world becomes digitized, as people are more mobile, right? So maybe their income is not geographically bound. And certainly this past year, we've seen a big change in that regard as they're using currency that's accepted around the world. So basically, as people are more able to be mobile, then jurisdictions will do more to attract them because say, hey, there's a bigger market of people out there. And so as certain jurisdictions, let's say in this particular example, keep taxing their people more and more and more, then those people will decide to leave.
Yeah, it becomes a less desirable place to live. No, people won't move there. Yeah.
So you have this kind of ongoing arbitrage where people are just saying, no, I don't want to live here because of XYZ. Oh, no, I don't want to live here because XYZ. And people move around until we get to a place that is more in line with the axioms and the ideals of that these people may hold. So like if I'm someone who desires very low taxation rate, I don't require any services. I'll take care of, I require minimal services, low taxation, et cetera, then, I'll end up in a place that offers that to, the most extent that's available right now. And so maybe that's where these axioms and ideals are relevant, because if it's what people want, if they feel it's wrong for too much to be taken from them or for them to be oppressed in some way, there's restrictions on what they can put in their body, what they can own, et cetera, then they'll find ways of circumventing that. And the reason why it's more relevant now than ever is because more and more people are able to do that.
Yeah, no, like this is one of the reasons I am really into Bitcoin. I want there to be a single global currency that is not controlled by anyone, so people can move around and make these choices easier. That's one of the reasons I'm into this. I would point out though that um, a lot of people who claim to really value freedom of property, for example, and lower taxation, still choose to live in places where the tax rate is quite high. I mean, you live in Canada, right?
Right now, but I haven't
Yeah.
for the last decade. Yeah.
Are you okay? But you're okay. Yeah. I guess similar there. I was in South Korea for a while. They had quite a low tax rate. But I'm happy moving back to Canada and paying a higher tax rate because there are other things here that are important to me for quality of life. Like, part of its culture, part of its cleaner air, part of its, I am much more free to put certain substances in my body here. And I think that one of the reasons we don't see this existence of a completely voluntary society is that a lot of things that are important to people um, are actually pretty hard to provide under such a scenario, and that I think it's very easy to take for granted a lot of the things that governments are very, very good at doing. I mean, we have water on tap here. That's like, I mean, I'm not aware of any like large scale society that has privatized water going into someone's homes. Like maybe I haven't done enough research on that, but like, Canada's got really, really effective sewage in its cities. Like we don't have problems with, cholera and, and again, that's something that a lot of states have been very, very effective at providing. So I think what is going to end up happening is that, yes, as you said, people will get to move around more freely and get to choose to live in places that more easily align with their values. But I think they're going to discover that their values are not quite as they don't value. They value freedom quite highly, but it's not the end all and be all. You're also going to value comfort to a certain degree. You're also going to value, you know, really effective infrastructure that it can probably be provided at a better cost by the government in some situations. That's people are going to disagree with that, but I think there is such a thing as a natural monopoly in certain regions, and in those situations, often a government can provide a better service than a private industry.
Can you explore that one a little bit?
Sure. Okay. Sewage is a great example. For example, like I'm going to compare food distribution with sewage. The countries that have tried to have the government control food production and distribution have been complete and utter disasters. This is great leap forward in China. This is starvation in Ukraine under the Soviet Union. In Cambodia, this was like half the people who died from the genocide was from starvation, if I remember correctly. It's been a complete disaster having the government try to control distribution of food. It makes sense to let farmers sell their food at cost. They can choose what they grow. Let grocery stores operate, etc. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that it's very easy to have competition. You can move food around quite quickly. You can build a grocery store next to another grocery store, and they can compete. For something like sewage, it's much more difficult for multiple sewage companies to come in and compete for like building pipes in and out of your house. It makes a lot more sense for there to be a single system in a neighborhood where everybody's pipes drain into one place and that all gets carried out, like at a city level. So I think in situations where the barrier to entry for competitors to come in and provide competing services, you definitely want that to be taken care of by the market. In situations where that's not the case, due to physical limitations or due to perhaps extremely high cost of entry, like capital costs, then the government services can do so better.
Yeah, I wonder about that because on the one hand, I think the government is in my opinion, is a less efficient allocator of resources than the market. And we kind of assume like, well, yeah, but for these really big things where we need to pool capital together to do, like you say, for sewage or something, then maybe it makes sense. But then I think of things like, SpaceX, space exploration and stuff was the purview of governments up until 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now we have private players in the market and they're doing, presumably, a lot more with fewer resources right now, and it's all very exciting and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
my kind of underlying premise is just that if the market demands it, then there will be someone within that market to meet that demand, assuming a big enough market. Now, you might make the case that in some cases the government is what the market is using to meet some of those demands. That maybe there's a discussion to be had there. But
you could probably pay a company to come into your house and take your sewage out by hand. No one's going to stop you, but
or there's more innovative solutions to that.
Sure.
Maybe.
As technology develops, I absolutely agree that this stuff might change over time. Like SpaceX is a great example. Sorry, I cut you off there. You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, that what one of the issues with delegating so much to the government, as you said, whether it's clean water or whatever, the government has done it very effectively. Well, one, we don't have much to compare it to, so we don't really know what effectively precisely means. But two, it's one of the hallmarks of government services is that the innovation is dramatically less than in the private sector and in the free markets.
Yeah, the lack of competition is a huge issue.
Yeah, so we say, but they're doing the sidewalks and they're doing the sewage and they're doing the healthcare and stuff, and isn't that great? You don't have to pay for it, and it helps you get on with your life. It's like, well, yeah, maybe on the surface, but maybe those are problems that I didn't need solved that way. Maybe they could have been solved a different way.
But I mean, the thing is, right now, there's a tremendous amount of services that we do let the private sector take care of. And then there's also services that we let the governments take care of. And so I think it's worth asking, why is it that companies many countries around the world seem to be converging on one way or the other? For example, why aren't we still having governments control food distribution? Well, because we just found that private distribution of food worked much more effectively. I think that if you want to drill down on one reason or on one field or another, we can. And if you're going to ask me, Mario, are there situations in which there are government services that should be privatized? I'm going to agree with you. You're probably going to find a bunch. SpaceX is an interesting one. I got to say, because they still are, highly dependent on government contracts to send, because the government pays them basically as a transport vehicle for their projects. So I do agree that's a good example of private industry doing much better than the government. And again, that's because I think it's a space that you can compete. You need extremely high capital costs or capital investment. So, you need Bezos and Musk to invest in it. But yeah, I think that the more privatized space gets, the better. We're getting comments asking me about healthcare.
Yeah, I see.
And healthcare is trickier. I don't know. I'm not as much of an expert on it to have a strong opinion one or the other. I will say that I had very good experiences with the healthcare system in South Korea, which seemed to capture the best of both worlds. I mean, in the United States, if you're rich, it sounds great. You got fantastic services, but you can also get bankrupted for getting sick. Now I'm sure there's a bunch of people wishing they could yell at me about how it's the regulation that causes this problem. Sure, okay, maybe it is. And in Canada, if I'm sick, I'm going to get treatment. I'm going to get high quality treatment, and I'm not going to need to pay for it. But you run into this issue of long waiting times. That's kind of one of the biggest complaints. And there are probably other government efficiencies there. In South Korea, the system they had was that kind of employers had to provide health insurance to citizens. And if you weren't employed, the government would provide the health insurance to you, but you still had to pay a percentage of outpatient costs. But then you could choose which hospital and clinic you go to, and the hospitals and clinics were all privately run, and the insurance companies would just pay them. This is a fantastic system, in my opinion, because you still get competition between the service providers. So you have high quality, healthcare on demand, but everyone's covered. You don't have people, refusing to go and get treatment because they can't afford it, or you don't have people getting treatment and then getting financially ruined for life. So yeah, there are probably a lot of situations where hybrid systems work well too.
Yeah, I think any place around the world today that offers the private option is at least a step in the right direction. But I still think we don't know what good healthcare service is. That's there's no context for making that claim. I go into the hospital in Canada too, and I think, wow, that's a fancy machine, and things are clean in here. But we don't really know. Just 15 years ago, you would have said, well, this NASA space program is the most sophisticated in the world. It's the absolute tip of the spear for technology. But
are you like, I mean, 15 years ago, people were not saying that about NASA.
Okay, you know what I'm saying,
Like,
though, right? Like people would, because there was
okay,
nothing,
sure,
there was no private option to compare it to. That's my point. So you say like, oh, well, government space exploration is the pinnacle of space exploration, and this is what we have. And then someone comes along, and the private market forces begin to get involved in this. And as you said, it's not solely based on private market forces, but we begin, innovation happens, and innovation flourishes, and costs come down, and we get to see, oh, it can be better, and in some cases it can be much better. So what I think, and also it's obviously all perverted by, I think, the size of the government, and as you said, the regulations that it imposes. So even within the private sector, it may mean that medicines, whether they be pharmaceuticals, it may mean diagnostic tech, etc., either can't come to market, or is priced out of the market, or there's regulatory capture from the big players, etc., etc., etc. That just means that we don't kind of get the market is not able to produce what the market is demanding. And it's because, I would argue, that kind of cap that the government puts on things, because of its kind of undue size and influence, mostly predicated on what it's able to, on its monopoly on force, which will be there regardless of whether we're on a hard money or fiat money, but dramatically exacerbated by their ability to siphon off the wealth of the market, of the citizenry that they govern, through fiat money. So it becomes so big and so influential and so powerful that all of the different perversions that a government that couldn't do that would do anyways are just amplified. And so I don't think we have a clear picture of, like, I don't think we can say the government's providing healthcare services in Canada is modern, is good, is effective. It's government healthcare. We don't really have much to compare it to.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I don't like the word good, because I mean, it's all whether or not it could be improved or not, and there's definitely room for improvement. It's just, what's the best way we can do that. But I disagree with the idea that there's no opportunity, there's nothing to compare it to. No, countries compete amongst each other. And I agree that if you look at a single state as a microcosm, that there is going to be a tendency for the government to just take more and more control over time. But then you do have this pressure where, countries that do that become less desirable places to live. And then over time, there is going to be pressure for them to emulate countries that don't follow them as far down that path. So there are, there are many different healthcare systems in different parts of the world, and some of them are absolute fucking disasters. And again, are there a lot of problems with Canada's? Absolutely. Is it one of the total disasters? No, I wouldn't describe it as that. But yeah, again, this is why, I would be very, very concerned if we saw something like a global state emerging, because then you really, really don't get signals as to where kind of, the room for improvement lies. But yeah, we shouldn't underestimate the competition between countries. It's an important force that I think a lot of people forget when they think about the state as a single entity. It's many, many entities.
I agree, and I think that's a good thing to consider. But still, most countries, the government is involved in healthcare in some way, shape, or form. So you're not getting this kind of pure free market representation of what healthcare would be anywhere.
But what would you say to someone that said, like, well, yeah, but also, like, most countries now don't control food production, so we're not really getting a strong signal for whether or not that should be privatized? I would say that.
Say that again.
I mean, for example, to go back to the food production distribution, basically no countries in the world, except maybe North Korea, every other country has, to a certain degree, privatized the production and distribution of food.
Yeah.
And I don't think that if a communist comes up to me and says, well, yeah, I mean, North Korea is an exception, and other than that, we don't really have a good comparison. Governments could run food production distribution better. I would say no. I think that over time, we've run this experiment a lot, and we've eventually figured out that this is something that's much better to be privately run. And I think that that doesn't guarantee it. It's possible that you might come up with some government system for doing this that works really well. I'm not holding my breath on that. But then you can just turn that around with services that are almost universally provided for by the government. Because if there have been societies where healthcare has been privatized in the past, but over time it's become more and more centralized. And I don't think that it makes sense to just assume that, that's entirely because, states have a tendency to grow bigger and there's been no opportunity to try out different ways. I think it's definitely an oversimplification.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the responses there would just be that the reason why the food system and distribution has proven itself to be better is because at least the way I think about it is that freedom, people were allowed to figure out what the best way is, and they figured out that allowing the free market to handle that was the best way.
Right.
I feel like the same thing has yet to be done in the healthcare system in, let's say, a prosperous nation where you say, let's let the free market handle this. We're not going to, provide as many welfare services, and let's see what it conjures up based on the demands of the market.
I mean, okay. Just to be clear, I'm not an expert in healthcare, and remember that my point here was that I would like to see more systems like the South Korean version, which leans more towards privatization.
Yeah. Sometimes I think these conversations are kind of moot because this is all just theoretical. It's subjective. It's our opinion. It's kind of cherry picking different historical scenarios and contexts and stuff like that. And I think it doesn't matter because the reason why. Well, let's put it this way. I don't think the free market is something. Hold on, let me get my thoughts straight. I think that someone said this before. I heard it. Someone write it. The money creates the free market. The free market doesn't, create the money. And just to tie it back to money. So I think until the money forces the free market, I don't think we get it. But I think we're entering into an era where that's going to happen. We talked about this kind of people moving around to different jurisdictions, having the jurisdictional arbitrage opportunities. My suspicion, again, just opinion, is that as this unfolds, we're going to see people that, let's say, think along the lines of the side of the argument that I've been representing, go to those places where their demand and their spending of dollars is their vote, is what determines what the market bubbles up, and go away from those places that still have a more top-down approach to certain things. And so I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think we've had that opportunity before, and I hate using that argument because I know,
sure, yeah,
the communists, and socialists.
Real communism has never been tried.
Right.
Real libertarianism has never been tried. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of, I guess it cancels. Everyone cancels each other out when they say that. But I just think we've been in a scenario where, people don't truly get to the free markets have not been fully possible. There's been this large suppressant effect of large states on top of them, siphoning off their wealth in reasonable and sometimes unreasonable ways, of course, determined by everybody. And I think wresting a huge part of their power from them, i.e. their ability to control and produce money, is probably going to mean a dramatic shrinking in their size and therefore less of an influence over the free market. And I think probably a flourishing of all the different services that are demanded in the market. But you said a little bit earlier that you don't think the state will shrink under, let's say, a Bitcoin standard. And I'd love to get your thoughts on why you think that is.
Oh, okay. If I did say that, I misspoke. I don't think I said that. I said I don't think it's going to be suddenly become a shell of its former self. I think there's a strong chance that it will shrink to a certain degree. And it is clearly Bitcoin, I think, is going to very effectively replace what was until now a government, an entirely government-run institution, which was money and international payments and stuff like that. That was all heavily run by the government. And I think it's great we're going to remove that, because this is a situation where, I think technology is allowing us to rely on the private sector more than the government. Awesome. I'm in favor of that. I guess I just it's the degree to which I think the state will be affected, where I estimate it's, states will still be able to effectively collect taxes and will still be a very, very prominent part of our lives. Hopefully less so. Despite, it's kind of funny whenever I talk to have these conversations with Bitcoiners, I always feel like the commie in the room. I'm in favor, taxes are good and government spending, governments do a lot of things right. And then whenever I leave the Bitcoin world, I'm like, I take the opposite end, where I'm I'm a big believer in free markets. That's why I work in this industry. I think it's what the engine that lifts places out of poverty. It's, capitalism is what, drives economic progress, which is ultimately what has improved most people's lives. And that's why I'm into this. And I've completely lost my train of thought. What was your question again?
I can't remember, but let's talk about the issue actually in the original tweet, which was UBI.
Sure.
Tell me your thoughts on UBI. Okay,
UBI, I think it's going to happen eventually. Partly because I think as societies become more and more prosperous, the percentage of your economy that it would be needed to provide basic living, a basic living stipend to its population becomes smaller and smaller. So 200 years ago, forget about it. You just didn't have societies weren't rich enough to provide that. Societies are becoming richer now. And I am in favor of certain regions trying different versions of it because it goes back to kind of Darwinism between states. I want to see competition. I want to see it tried in different forms in different places and see what works and what doesn't. I think that when a lot of Bitcoiners hear UBI, they kind of assume, okay, this is just going to be the government printing a shit ton of money and just giving it away to people, and they're not going to want to work anymore. And I think that's a very, very naive and simplistic way of looking at it. First of all, I don't see any reason to assume that UBI could not be provided without money printing. I think it's perfectly possible for a state in the future to rely completely on taxation and distribute UBI. And I also think that it solves a lot of incentives issues with current welfare systems. So I'm a proponent of it replacing a lot of existing welfare systems. For example, you only receive unemployment if you stop working, which provides more of an incentive to stop working. Now, with UBI, if you can start working again and you're still receiving that amount per month, the barrier to start working again, even like a smaller or part-time job, is lower. So it makes it easier to get out of a welfare situation if you are one who is in it. I guess those are the two main thrusts.
But don't you think that if you just give people money for free, that there'll be more money for those people to spend? But this, giving people money doesn't change the amount of goods in a market, right? So you give all these people money to presumably spend on healthcare, food, whatever it is they need. Yeah. Prices just adjust upward to meet that increased demand, and then we're back where we started, except everyone's been taxed more.
No, I think that's overly simplistic. The effect it'll be a distributive effect. So if I'm a wealthy person who makes $10,000 a month and I receive an extra $1,000, my my purchasing power goes up by 10%. If I am out of work and I receive $1,000 or I would receive none, my purchasing power goes up far, far more. So yeah, it probably will have it will definitely affect price signals on basic needs and stuff, on certain things. But I think it's overly simplistic to say, the prices will just adjust. The prices will adjust, but they will not adjust so much to completely negate the effect. That's the gist of it.
Why not, though? Because you're giving it to them to spend, because it's the people that need it to spend, right? Like if I'm a wealthy person and let's say I'm just saving it, it's capital stock, it's available for lending, saving.
Well, the wealthy person's also going to get taxed more. So their net, the amount of money they get actually goes down. But yeah.
What's that?
I mean, if you're going to implement UBI under this system where you're taxing people, then if you're a wealthy person receiving it, your income taxes or whatever other taxes will go up more than the UBI you're receiving. So I mean, it's a redistributive effect. Redistributive effect, yeah.
Yeah, and it's going from people less likely to spend it to people more likely to spend it.
Yes.
Especially on the staples that people need, right? So
Right.
how would there not be a commensurate increase in prices over time if you're just giving people, if you're redistributing money, but you're not increasing the goods on the market?
Well, okay, because I'm a person who, like, let's say, let's say I make $1,000 a month, and I suddenly receive UBI. My purchasing power has effectively doubled. Are you asserting that all of the things I would spend that money on, their prices would double?
I'm asserting that if you spent that money,
Mm.
let's say in accordance with your pre-existing habits,
Sure.
that over time prices would tend to adjust upward in relation
Yes.
to the extra amount of money that's being spent.
Right, but I don't like, but everybody buys food, right? So if UBI increases the purchasing power of disproportionately of the bottom portion of society, that doesn't mean everybody doubles the amount of money they spend on food, right?
No,
So
but it means everybody's spending more.
on food? No, if I receive UBI, I'm not going to spend that on food. I already eat enough.
Well, it's more spending happening without more
I
goods
agree.
being produced. So prices will have to adjust up.
Right. Again, so this is, you're making a good argument against the fact that UBI does not create wealth or does not create any new goods or services. I agree with that. It is redistributive. It is allowing the poorer parts of society to spend, to acquire a greater proportion of the wealth that is already there. I agree that wealth creation is a massively important topic, and UBI does not solve that. There are other things we need to do to solve that. Yeah,
but I guess I'm saying, like, maybe it's not, again, given the appropriate amount of time, but let's say it's not 100% commensurate, right? So you give someone $100 in UBI and their net expenses increase as a result of increasing prices by $100. Okay,
sure.
let's say it's whatever it is, 50%, 75%, 80%. You enter into this, if this is
cycle
your,
where you need to continue,
if this is your approach to ameliorating the circumstance of people in a society, then you enter into this cycle where you keep having to give more and more money because prices continue to rise, and it has a limit to its effectiveness until it ruins everything.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of jumps you're making there. Like, I mean, again, I don't think you've made a convincing case that the rising price will be enough to enter such a negative feedback loop. Otherwise, like, I mean, we've had a welfare state for the last, I don't know, like few generations in Canada, right? Like, by and large, people tend not to starve to death in this country. Like, I mean, if you stop working, you're going to be able to get money from the government. Now, there have been negative effects from that. But the end result is that compared to other points in history, people, do not starve to death here. People, like, some people are homeless, but again, it's far, far less common than in most countries, in most places that do not have a welfare state. So yeah, there are negative effects you're saying. I don't think you've made a case that that it would necessarily form a negative price spiral. I think that there would be an equilibrium you could reach. And I think that a lot of the arguments you're making now, like, do you think we're currently in that spiral because of the existing welfare state?
Mm-hmm.
That was a question.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Okay. But then why is it that quality of life has gone up over the last few generations? Like, I mean, it
says who?
Well, I mean, choose a metric, for example. Like what? Like, I mean, you can ask, like, stuff like infant mortality, nutrition. Like, for example, malnourishment is not a problem in Canada anymore. Not a widespread one. Like, obesity is a bigger problem. That's a big indication that we've solved what was one of the main problems, facing humanity for ages. And again, the markets have been a big part of that. But I don't think, I don't see evidence that we have this that society is, like, crumbling because of these, like, distorted price signals. You can argue that we've slowed down and that we're not doing things optimally and things would be better off if we had improved price signals. I'm with you there, but I don't believe that we've entered this negative spiral. No.
I think, yeah, see, I think we're well into a negative spiral, and we're testing the limits of how much it can be used. But because, again, like, I don't think there's free lunches,
Well, Well, I
So I
mean,
don't think.
it's not a free lunch. It's a lunch paid for by the more productive parts of society.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
that
and you could
ultimately
argue that's
has.
not fair.
Well, I think it's not fair, but I think it has deleterious effects. I think it reduces the incentive to create wealth over time, not
Okay,
immediately, but over time. And then
sure.
what you have is less wealth to distribute, and then that policy or tactic for distributing wealth in order to improve society breaks down.
Well, yes and no. I mean, like, because there are some positive effects on wealth creation from stuff like UBI and welfare, in that it allows people to take time off and acquire other skills. It allows people to a greater safety net will make more people comfortable doing risky but beneficial things like trying to start, a business or being an entrepreneur. So I think there are other effects. But like, yeah, I mean, okay, but like to come back to like,
I
I
have a
don't think.
question.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question for you. I was just going to say, if we're willing to use force, violence to steal property from people in order to contribute to the common good,
Mhm.
if we're kind of morally okay with that, why shouldn't we be morally okay with, or what's the difference, I guess is a better question, in being okay with people starving? I mean, people starve all over the world every day. Why is it your problem if people starve?
Because I think starving causes a lot of suffering, and I am opposed to suffering.
Right, but isn't it suffering if I consider it suffering if people put a gun in my face and take my property?
I sorry, John. Like, I'm less worried about you having to pay taxes on your income than I am about someone starving to death. I like, again, like, if we can have a world where you can get more of what you build and keep, I'm for that. But that's less of a priority for me than ensuring people grow up with enough food to eat. I like you, dude, but you gotta like, I mean, and again, if it's a matter of prioritization. I don't think that you can. I think it's crazy that people can think those are comparable. Does that make sense? Like, I mean, you might not agree with it, but I hope I'm articulating why I hold these views.
I mean, I'm hearing you loud and clear, that you think, yeah, I mean, that you think aggressing against someone to take their property is less morally, or is more morally acceptable than
But
allowing someone to starve, I guess, right?
well, I mean, okay, again, like, I mean, I think. Like, I mean, I generally don't bring this up, but like, I would not phrase it as like aggressing against someone, because you're not actually being aggressed against. There's a threat there, but
Well, that's
like,
because we're
you're not.
complying.
Exactly, yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, you're not like, I mean, if you were getting beaten up every day, like, I mean, I again, that would bump up my,
Well, if you don't comply, you can be wind up in a steel cage, right?
no,
It's possible.
yeah, I agree, but there's a difference between that and people who are actually dying, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
So that's why I place higher priority on that, right?
them starving has nothing to do with anything I've done in my life, and I'm
Oh
not
yeah, no, I'm
trying
not
to
blaming
say
you.
that I'm
Yeah,
a monster here. Like, I
sure,
have
sure, yeah,
compassion, but I'm just, for the sake of the argument, is that, if I wind up in a situation in my life where I've accumulated wealth and someone
yeah,
comes and says, "Look, I'm going to put a gun in your face to take more of what you're willing to pay for the services that you're provided with,"
yeah.
versus me knowing that there's people in society that, for whatever reason, aren't able to eat,
Yeah.
and that same entity taking care of them versus the charity of the community, family, the free market itself, and all the different solutions that it might provide is more of a moral priority, I guess. I think, yeah, I definitely disagree with that.
But yeah, sure. I mean, but I mean, I think what it comes down to is, yeah, I think in utilitarian terms, I'm interested in in pushing for the types of society that will yield the greatest net, flourishing for people, best health, longevity, and happiness, and the least suffering and pain.
But that's
And
what I'm interested in
right,
too.
exactly. So yeah, so I think it's kind of a waste of time for us to argue about these, like, things. Like, so again, I think it comes back to empiricism. This is like, you've made this case that UBI would likely result in these spiraling price signals. I don't think that's the case. Great. I think you and I should both hope that certain regions around the world try different types of UBI, and we can see how it goes.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm dead wrong. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that this is guaranteed to happen. I am absolutely in favor of trying it. like in general, I'm in favor of trying new things. I'm in favor of people moving to some fucking island and trying their whole voluntariist society and seeing how that goes. And if it goes well, boom, awesome. We can learn from it and other states can emulate them. I'm also in favor of certain regions saying, you know what, we're going to do this UBI thing and we're going to see how it goes. You know, and maybe we will learn that, yeah, everybody stops working and then, you know, the state capacity disappears because no one's paying taxes and everyone leaves. And then I will have to adjust my beliefs on UBI accordingly. I'll be like, okay, well, at least that different form if it doesn't work. And possibly I should lower my confidence that any form if it works. So yeah, let's see how it goes, man.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the reason why there's probably pushback to that perspective, not that, you know, it's entirely unreasonable from an empirical perspective, but it's just that it's kind of, it's obviously tacit approval for an entity that a lot of people believe is morally and in other ways corrupt, and that's probably why you get pushback when you you know comment the way you did on that.
I kind of deliberately make the
of course
the statements more controversial so I can get in these conversations.
Right. One thing, you still there? No, frozen. I think you're frozen.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back. You were just showing a real weak connection there for a sec. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I think, you know, with the UBI as well, and I think you've made your point on the price signal. I think it would be, well, one, I think it would probably entail money printing. But even if it doesn't, I think the distortive effects on the price signal would probably be substantial, you know, even just something like the price of labor or whatever. But what I'm more interested in talking about is another big thing that comes up with the welfare state, and we use this term fiat, you know, fill in the blank in the Bitcoin space, is that it has this perverse effect on behavior. And so I'll just use an overly simplified, and again, we're speculating, none of this can, you know, be easily proven, et cetera. But with state provided healthcare, I feel like it's a fairly logical case to make that it creates even if subconscious, disincentive for you to, or increases the disincentive for an individual to take care of their health, or maybe it makes them more cavalier with their health, knowing that the costs associated with ill health will not be borne by them. And therefore, the risks of engaging in behaviors that might lead to ill health or are quote unquote risky behaviors are actually less of a risk for them, because the consequence of that risk is not borne by them, it's borne by somebody else. So we get these behaviors in society, and let's just use a very simple one, let's say like obesity, where would there be less obesity if people knew and had to take responsibility for their own health rather than being able to delegate health issues to somebody else? Do you think so? The question is, do you think about kind of the impacts on behavior, most often subconscious, of the welfare state?
I think they're wildly overblown. I think there's a grain of truth to them, but I mean, like in terms of health, I mean, I think most, if you're poor and obese, I think you would probably rather not be obese still. I would guess. Like, I don't want to speak for someone who's in this situation, but
you would consciously probably. But the point is how much do these affect kind of your subconscious decision making of like, well, because if you knew it was going to cost you $20,000,
it seems, I would guess it's a pretty low probability that it's a significant effect. I think that people have a desire to take care of their health naturally, and that a lot of the reasons we have poor health, well, actually, we actually have fantastic health in kind of Western societies compared to most humans throughout most of history. Our health is incredible, and it's getting better over time. Yeah, absolutely. Compared to like what point in human history? Compared to 99% of humans since the dawn of time? Absolutely.
Since the dawn of civilization, or since the dawn of time?
Either one. I mean, people really, I think, fantasize about these hunter-gatherer communities where life was perfect. We were perfectly in tune with nature. I don't know if that's where you were going with this, but like, I mean, you know, like 50% of babies used to not reach the age of 5. Like, that's a pretty big win as far as I'm concerned. Like, malnutrition is essentially a non-issue in most of the Western world. Like, obesity is a big problem, but if you think about that, that's kind of that's a better problem to have. than malnutrition. Like, we have enough food, we just now need to get people to, exercise more self-control, for example. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with, there being an evolutionary mismatch between, like, we're kind of designed to eat sweet foods because fruit had a lot of vitamins and nutrients that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten in our ancient environment. And because fruit was just about the only sweet thing you would find, we would eat as much of it when we could find it. Whereas now they pack sugar into candy bars, which are not healthy for you. And again, I don't think that's because there's a subconscious effect of like, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I damage my health because like welfare system is going to take care of me. No, I think that's a very, very minor part of it, and it's wildly overblown.
So to what extent, if any, do you think, the welfare state, to the extent that it exists, and to the size and influence that it wields, influence in people's lives, affects how people's behavior, how they develop, how they behave?
To what extent? Like, I don't know how to put a number on that. That is very hard to pin down. I don't know. I think that it's a factor, but it's I think it's one of many, many, many factors.
Right.
Sorry, I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but I'm not going to pretend that I know if I don't, but I think it'd be very naive to assume it is the dominant factor. Consider, like, humans are absolutely fucking complicated, and we have so many kind of weird quirks about us, so many kind of leftover, like genetic programming from earlier times. Saying, oh, it's this one thing that causes almost everything. I don't think that's very reasonable.
No, I wouldn't say that. I guess the place where I was coming from with it is just that I feel like the more responsibilities that we delegate to external providers, peoples, whatever, the more we do that,
the less people feel obligated to provide for themselves, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Sure. I mean,
there's a lot wrapped up in providing for yourself, right? In both education and
yeah, I think like status, the desire for status is a far, far stronger influence. Like, I mean, like, especially if you're a guy, like, I imagine it's probably harder for you to get laid or like get an awesome girlfriend if you have just decided you're not going to work. Like, I mean, like, there are plenty of people who work jobs that are much more stressful, much more time intensive than they would need to get by, because they want to own more. They want to, have nicer lifestyles. They want to attract better mates, and I think these are all far, far stronger drivers of human behavior than the welfare state.
Oh yeah. I don't disagree with that at all. I guess, the original question was just pointing to another potential thing to consider when we look at the kind of validity of the welfare state model. Like, is that something that we should be investigating to understand the risks and benefits of going down that road, basically?
Again, this is why I'm like, more places should try these different new potential policies, and then we can see how they play out.
Yeah. What's now that we're, I don't know how much time you have. You just let me know.
I can do another 10 minutes probably.
All right. What's been another kind of hot button issue that you've been, poking the bear at lately? Poking the bear with?
I am not sure.
Because we don't have time to dig into the psychedelic conversation now.
Next time, man. We'll do mushrooms another time. I don't know, man. We've hit a lot of the big ones. I don't know what else. Usually when I get arguments with people, it's about fees in the block space market and stuff. That's just left over some careless comments from years ago. I don't know anything I can cover in 10 minutes that wouldn't drag us down a rabbit hole. How about you? What have you been poking people about recently?
Well, I mean,
I can interview you for the last 10 minutes.
I hate to give a cop-out answer, but I feel like, a lot of my positions are in line with the, dominant Bitcoiner narrative.
I think they are. We're talking about eggshells in your food, yeah? You did that one. But
yeah, I did do that one. Yeah. It's not a regular habit anymore, just because it's a pain in the ass. But yeah, I read the carnivore code. I've been experimenting with diet, my entire life.
Are you full carnivore?
No. I would say about 80 to 90%.
Oh,
But
what else do you eat?
pizza and ice cream.
Oh, oh, I thought you were gonna be like, I eat asparagus now. Man. Okay, all right.
You know, I have some avocado and that kind of stuff, but you know,
Okay.
I kind of like a 80, 80, 20, 90, 10 sort of thing.
All right. And how long you been doing that?
I mean, I've been like paleo for the last decade, and I've just
Okay,
kind
okay.
of upped the meat and down, you know, reduced the vegetables over the last little while as I experiment with carnivore. But
Do you ever think maybe I should go vegan for a month just to try it?
I did it for 4 months.
Oh, you did? Oh yeah. How did that go?
Really bad.
Yeah. I wouldn't go vegan.
I didn't.
I'm a happy omnivore.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy it at all. I lost a bunch of weight. I looked like thin and, you know, lost muscle mass and stuff. But it's interesting, you know, I need to, I'm getting to the point where I'll try it strict for a while, like for a couple of months. Cause like I said, you know, I'll still on the weekend, I'll have a slice of pizza or a Dairy Queen Blizzard or some shit like that. So I haven't gone full bore yet, but I will. And I like, you know, I eat meat in the morning, you know, and I don't eat carbs usually until the evening. And in the evening, I'll have like a bowl of blueberries or a banana or something like that. That's my balance right now. As far as controversial, man, I can't think of much that
You're not trying hard enough, man. You
I mean,
you gotta find something. There's gotta be something. You can't just adopt all the Bitcoiners' views and be like, yeah, this is my life now.
I didn't adopt it all. This is how I was when I came. I think that's part of the reason.
Oh yeah, you just found it, and like the Bitcoin was the only new thing.
When I showed up, I think that's why I love the Bitcoiners so much.
The psychedelics are a bit edgy. I find there's a lot of like social conservatives in the space. I think that's might be it.
Maybe, but like I've been open. Well, I've been into psychedelics for you know, over a decade, and I've been open about it since day one. You know, speaking publicly and interviewing people in the psychedelic space prior to doing Bitcoin stuff. And you know, what I've found is that a lot of Bitcoiners are, you know, psychonauts or psychonaut curious sort of people, right? And there's that legacy of the Silk Road and people buying drugs on the Silk Road with Bitcoin. So
and it fits in with libertarianism as well, like, you know, what you want in your own body. Yeah,
and it fits in with curiosity and trying to understand yourself better and understand the world better and all that kind of stuff. So I don't consider, you know, psychedelics are in the renaissance as well right now. So it's not like I'm not cool. You know, in 2008, when I'd go to a party and talk about ayahuasca, people would be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Oh,
like,
you've done ayahuasca, yeah?
Yeah. And in 2008 and 9, I spent 4 months each year in the Amazon just learning about it and, you know, doing ceremonies.
Four months a year?
Yeah.
Oh, crazy. Where did you go?
The first time I went to southern Peru, and then the second time I was in northern Peru. Like, do you know where Iquitos is?
Yeah, I was in Iquitos last year for 11 days. Yeah.
Nice. Did you go to Blue Morpho?
No, I went to a smaller.
But it was in Iquitos?
Or it's outside of Iquitos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I went to a place outside of Iquitos too. It was about an hour, 2-hour boat ride downriver. And it was just a small village where the shaman had grown up. And, you know, just wanted to, at that time, I was extremely curious about that stuff. I wanted to learn more. So spend time with them and, you know, make the brew and do ceremonies and, you know, puke and shit your guts up and all that fun stuff. And, and so, yeah, it was edgy back then, but now it's like everybody has heard about it.
Yeah, I was late to the party.
Which is great. I think it's amazing because it's they can be such a powerful force and catalyst for positive change that I think, you know, the more people understand them and treat them properly, that's, you know, the big key. A lot of people still frame them in the recreational context, but
I think recreational is okay as long as you're not an idiot about it. You know?
I think you have to make the distinction between the two, right? Like they're not identical. So you can do psychedelics recreationally, but that's that's different than the, let's say, ceremonial use of psychedelics.
I agree that they're not identical. I think there can be heavy overlap. I've derived a lot of benefits from recreational.
But my point is just that when I talk about it, I don't like I try to make it clear.
It's not like a party drug. It's like
I try to make it clear
seriously that
they're different pursuits and the outcomes and the experience can be different.
I agree with that. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to cover that another time. I think I really gotta get going.
Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate you coming on and being open and having a chat, and we'll tackle the psychedelic stuff next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was fun.
All right, brother. Take care of yourself.
Later.
Bye-bye.